All right, moving right along in the program. Try to keep us on schedule as much as possible so we don't have to miss lunch. I know that's very important to everyone here. It's my privilege to introduce our next speaker to the podium. We are here in Denver, Colorado, and thus we are excited to have, for the first time ever at a RedState gathering, Colorado Senator Cory Gardner. Cory won a difficult race last time around and was a key part of the Republicans retaking the Senate. And we are just delighted to have him here to speak to all of you. So let's give a warm round of applause to Senator Cory Gardner.
Good morning. Thank you. Thanks. Well, good morning, RedState. How's everybody doing this morning? Very good. Has everybody enjoyed Colorado so far, I hope? And thank you for being here in Denver. Now, I hope all of you have gone out to enjoy some of Colorado's newest homegrown products. And of course, I'm talking about Coors Native Beer. I don't know what you were thinking about. I'm talking about Coors Native Beer. It's a great time for you to be here. I think it's an exciting time for us to talk about politics, elections, and campaigns. I had all these ideas about what I was going to talk about at RedState, but I have just spent the last 2 weeks traveling all over the state of Colorado. I've been in the Eastern Plains, the Western Slope, and this is an incredible, diverse state, a very beautiful state. And I thought I would share with you, just before I start giving the speech that I've been planning, a couple of the things and observations that I've taken away from meeting with hundreds, if not thousands, of constituents around the state of Colorado over the past couple weeks. You know, we met with an employer who's trying to start a vineyard in western Colorado. And he said to me, after we talked about government regulations and what was happening in this country, he said, you know what's sad, Cory, is that the incentive from the government for me today is to have as few as employees as possible. All right, so here's a businessman who wants to create jobs, grow our economy. All of us, you see on TV every night on the mainstream media saying we need to grow the economy, grow jobs, but yet people who are actually investing their hard-earned dollars, people who are actually putting themselves on the line and taking risks are saying, our government is telling us, hire as few people as we can because otherwise we get penalized and we'll never be able to start that business. For the first time, you've heard it multiple times, the statistic that says there are more businesses going out of business in this country than there are businesses getting started in this country. And what a shame that is for the United States of America. Now, go over to the eastern plains of Colorado, the northeastern part of the state, a little tiny town called Ovid, Colorado. Now, nobody knows where Ovid is. I live in Yuma. Yuma's a metropolis of 3,000 people compared to Ovid. There's a meat packer there. How many people know Cabela's? If you get the Cabela's catalog, you can order bacon from D&L Meats. They're located in Ovid, Colorado. So we walked into D&L Meats. Growing up in eastern Colorado, I knew you could walk into this place and they had the best doggone beef sticks you could ever buy. You could also buy some steaks and some bacon there. So I went into Ovid, went into D&L, planning on buying some beef steaks, and I walk in and I see the refrigerators there full of bacon, full of steaks. They had some cheese, they had some Pepsis and soda products, but no beef sticks. And I said, where are the beef sticks? And he said, we can't sell them anymore. And I'm like, well, what happened? He said, because we don't have the right permit, the HACCP plan, because if we sell beef sticks, then we're a grocery store. And I said, now wait a minute, you can sell bacon, and you can sell steak, you can sell cheese, and you can sell pop, but you can't sell beef sticks? And he looked at me and says, yeah. Now, I don't know about you, but can you imagine the conversation at Valley Forge that George Washington had with some of his top lieutenants when they said to him, General Washington, you know what would make America great? If you couldn't sell beef sticks and bacon at the same time. That's what's happening in America today. And it makes me think about who we are as a country. I live in a little tiny town in the eastern plains of Colorado where family is very much a center part of who I am. My grandmother's 92 years old. She was a big part of our campaign back in 2014. During World War II, she and my grandpa were desperately looking for work. They wanted to be a part of the war effort. Grandpa tried to get into the Army, but he failed the physical. He couldn't do it, but they still wanted to participate. They had one daughter, my aunt at the time. They would go on to have 4 kids. But they decided to be a part of that effort, so they packed up everything they owned into a 1930s Dodge car, packed up that young daughter they had, my aunt, drove across the country to Portland, Oregon. Somewhere in the middle of Idaho, their car broke down. This 1930s Dodge broke down, and they had a little spotlight on the driver's side of the door that they sold in order to pay for the repairs so they could make it all the way to Portland. In Portland, they found work. They found work in the shipyards building Liberty ships for the war effort. Both my grandpa and my grandma became welders. My grandma's a real-life Rosie the Riveter. They lived in a single apartment above a grocery store where Grandpa had a second job. Worked there bagging groceries, and they didn't even have a kitchen in this apartment. They just had a single electric burner stove where they'd heat up Denny Moore stew so that they could make money, go back to Yuma, Colorado, and live their dreams. I tell that story because it's a story that reflects so many of the people who are here today. Your moms and dads, your grandparents and great-grandparents. It's a story of who we are, of sacrifice, of commitment, of doing everything you could of your own volition, your own hard work, and your own will to lift yourself up, to make yourself successful. This past 4th of July, we celebrated 240 years of this nation since 1776. 240 years. Now, remember what was happening in the moments that led up to that signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. You know, the war for independence wasn't going that well. It wasn't going that well. We were losing some fights. We were having struggles trying to get people engaged and to keep their enlistments. General Washington was begging people to stay involved and to make sure that they would continue to be a part of our effort. In fact, one of the very first victories that we experienced in that year was Christmas night, 1776, when George Washington led a brave group of men across the frozen Delaware River to surprise the British and the Hessian soldiers in Trenton. And we won. And that became one of the first signs that this young upstart nation of planters and farmers could take on the most powerful force in the world, the British Empire. And it was around that time that we heard people like Thomas Paine write these words. You've heard them many times before. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. We went on to victory at Yorktown. And we went on from there several years later to defeat the British Empire and to become a new nation. But in the years that followed, it wasn't all great. We had tremendous challenges as a nation because we had fought tyranny. We had fought this yoke of tyranny and big government. And so we didn't want to turn around and do the same thing in this country. So we created what? The Articles of Confederation. This loose association of states that would come together to, yes, be a nation, but to ensure the most possible, highest amount of states' rights and individual liberties that we could obtain. But over the years, we noticed that the Articles of Confederation weren't working that great because states began to create their own money, they began to create and raise their own militias, their own navies, and it just didn't work well. And there was an argument in this country. Remember the argument that took place? The argument that took place was, should we form a better government or should we continue with what we have because we still have this great fear of tyranny and an all-powerful government? And in 1787, a group of people without authorization, without direction, got together and started talking about what a new constitution or a new government could look like. But unlike England, unlike the tyrants around the world, this government, the people here believed that we would have these conversations not in private behind closed doors, but in public. So in 1787, they began having this public discourse about what kind of a government we should create. And they argued about it in the New York papers publicly, writing what they believed should work for a federal system of government. But there were people very concerned that that federal system of government would create the same kind of yoke of government power that we had just defeated. And they were the anti-federalists. So we had this debate in public, showing already what kind of a different nation we are between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Remember what they created, what they argued about. They argued about the Bill of Rights. They talked about the judiciary. They talked about the separation of powers, 3 branches of government. They talked about who we would become as a nation. And eventually they came in 1789 with our Constitution today, enshrining those 3 virtues: judiciary, executive, and legislative. But here we are today, at a time when these face greater threats than perhaps any other time in our country. Threats to the independence of government, growth in the executive branch, a weakening of the legislative power, all because of whether or not we have an executive branch that believes in the rule of law. All because we have a legislative branch that has decided that instead of writing specific legislation, it has given great swaths of authority and discretion to the regulators to make rules and laws. And because of a judiciary. In 1994, when Newt Gingrich and the Republican Revolution took place, the contract with America, one of the keystone things that they talked about in 1994 was how we are going to stand against activist judges. But today we have judges who won't stand up to the federal government when it exceeds its power. John Adams once, in a letter to his wife Abigail, wrote this question to her saying, "I wonder if future generations of this country will deserve the freedoms that we have fought for." And when you look at the past 8 years, we wonder whether or not John Adams has an answer to that question. We have seen what the past 8 years have made for this country. We have seen exploding debts and deficits, erosions of the rule of law. We have seen as this country has grown weak in the eyes of our enemies and weak in the eyes of our allies. We have seen what happens when justices and judges are appointed by a president who picks and chooses what laws to enforce, and nowhere is it better to discuss that than Colorado. Because right here, I made the joke at the beginning, but in 2012, when Colorado was given the choice about whether or not we would have recreational marijuana, I believe it was the same year that the state of Oklahoma voted whether or not they should opt out of Obamacare. Both of these measures passed. To the state of Colorado, the Obama administration says, states' rights, do what you want. To the state of Oklahoma, they say it's federal law, Obamacare is yours. When Hillary Clinton went before the United States Congress, telling the world about her view of what happened at Benghazi, she asked this very simple question. What difference does it make? We know what difference it makes when you have a president who will stand for the rule of law. We know what difference it makes when you have a Congress that will stand from the rule of law and take away from the bureaucrats and the regulators the discretion that we have given them. And we know what difference it makes when we have judges from the U.S. Supreme Court down to the district courts who will stand up for freedom, for liberty, and to make sure that we have those rights that weren't created by man, but ensured and given to us by the Almighty. There's a couple very simple things that we should do. And I know over the past couple of days you've talked about them, and I hope you'll continue to talk about them. A couple of things that we should do right now. Number one, in the state of Colorado, we have a rule review bill. I'm sure you've heard about the REINS Act. The rule review bill in Colorado says every year the state legislature is going to vote up or down on whether or not a rule or regulation goes into effect. It's a way for the legislative branch to have a check on the governor. We should be doing the same thing at the federal level. Why shouldn't we be able to say what is good, make sure that we have the check, the ability to say if it's really good enough? Let's allow the Congress to vote on rules and regulations that come out of the executive branch. The second thing we should do, we should have a sunset on regulations. 10 years, 15 years, 7 years, I don't know what the magic number is, but I do know that just because a regulation passed in 1960 doesn't mean it's good in 2016. Because if it were, D&L could still sell beef sticks and bacon at the same time. We also, I believe, and I think this is an area where people disagree with sometimes, we should have biennial budgeting. And here's why. It's to the appropriator's advantage every year to string out the appropriations process. You start in January, you work hard by September, you may not have the job done by November, you really don't have the job done by December, you got to get something done. And then you start all over again the next year in January. If we had biennial budgeting with something like James Langford has proposed in place that forces Congress to get its job done, then you can spend the next year and a half doing what Congress has failed to do for the last decade or more, and that is investigate the executive agencies, to provide oversight to the executive agencies, and to make sure that we are holding them accountable for the decisions that they are making, and that we can authorize agencies that haven't been authorized for decades. Those are the principles and things that we should stand for. These are some other issues that we should pick up, very simple steps that we should take that would restore trust with the American people. If you work protective service in FBI, if you're in the Secret Service, you're not allowed to be in a union because they don't want politics to interfere with the job that you're doing. And yet we know that if you're working for the IRS, you can join a union. You can pay union dues. And those union dues are then targeted politically by an agency that has targeted politically conservative organizations time and time again over the last several years. So let's pass legislation to make sure that the IRS cannot unionize and use that political power against the people of this country. These are all simple things that we can accomplish together. But going back to Hillary Clinton's question of what difference does it make? Over the next 4 years, I was talking to a former Department of Justice official who said, according to his rough calculations, that 25% of the judiciary will turn over every 4 years of a presidency. Think about that. Every 4 years, about 25% will turn over. So 25% in the first 4 years. 25% in the second 4 years. And if Hillary Clinton becomes president, it's 25% on top of the 50% that's occurred the last 8 years. What difference does it make, she said? What difference does it make to our Second Amendment rights? Because the very guns that Hillary Clinton has used to protect herself for the past several decades are the very guns that she wants to take away from you and I. What difference does it make? As secretary, one of the key architects of Obamacare through Hillary Care, she's taken away our health care. But yet it doesn't have to apply to her. So whether it's guns, health care, emails, oaths of office to protect the secrets of this country, what applies to Hillary doesn't apply to us. Do as Hillary says, not as Hillary does. That's the challenge this nation faces. So what difference does it make? The difference is whether we go back to that great debate that took place from 1787 to 1789 about who we were as a nation and who we were going to be, and so that in the next years to come, we can answer the question that John Adams stated: yes, every generation of America deserves the very freedoms that they fought for. For those of you who aren't from Colorado, you may or may not know that just a few miles down the road is Pikes Peak, Colorado Springs, a great 14,000-foot peak in Colorado. It's also the place in 1893 that Catherine Lee Bates climbed up on top and looked out across the eastern plains and penned the words to America the Beautiful. She talked about the amber waves of grain. She talked about the exceptionalism of a nation. And she grabbed the attention of the world with the words that she wrote. It is here at the foot of Pikes Peak in Colorado where you were gathering to talk about liberty, freedom, equality, the rights that our founders envisioned. It is here at the foot of Pikes Peak where our mountains are made of gold, just like our athletes are made of gold in the Olympic City in Colorado Springs. It's here at the foot of Pikes Peak where the soldiers at Fort Carson work each and every day to protect you and I, and we never even get a chance to thank most of them in person because we've never met them. But But it's here where we can give them our thanks by rallying together, by uniting as conservatives to make sure that the difference we make is the difference between a constitutional government and one that decides it can take away those rights from the people. I'm running out of time here, and I want to finish with one last story. Fort Collins, Colorado is just up the road from here. As a member of Congress, I had no idea that one of the things that I was able to do was I knew that I could help nominate men and women to the Air Force Academy, Naval Academy, West Point, but I had no idea that I was able to be the first person to call them and congratulate them and let them know that they had been offered an appointment. And I'll never forget the first phone call that I made to a student up in Fort Collins, Colorado. His name was Reed. I was so excited to make this phone call. I called him up. I got the house. I reached the house, and his mom answered the phone, which I was not expecting. I was expecting Reed to answer the phone. And I was so excited to make this phone call. I said, "Hello, this is Congressman Cory Gardner. Is your son Reed there?" To which his mom replied, "Why is the congressman calling my son?" Well, that wasn't the answer I thought I'd get. So I followed it up with what I thought was another really exceptional response. "Well, can you keep a secret?" And she responded to me, "Why does the congressman want me to keep a secret?" At this point, this call is not going well at all. And I said, "Well, I just wanted to be the first to let Reed know that he's been offered a fully qualified appointment to West Point." And she started crying on the phone. And Reed got on the phone, and I told Reed, and he started crying on the phone. By the time this call is over, I'm crying on the phone. But I tell that story because there are countless men and women in this room who've stood up time and time again for this nation. Millions of people around this country who've put it all on the line, people that we'll never be able to meet face to face to thank them for what they've done. But we owe it to them, each and every one of them, our children, and the next generation of this nation, to make sure that this is a nation always worth fighting for. And I know we're going to do it right here at Red State. Thank you very much for having me today. It's been an honor and a privilege, and thank you for being in Colorado.